Natalie smiled as she signed her divorce papers. Everyone thought she'd lost everything. What nobody in that courtroom knew was that within a year, the people celebrating her divorce would be facing criminal investigations. Not because she was happy, not because 8 years of marriage could be erased with one signature. She smiled because, after months of pretending to be powerless, she finally knew something no one else inside that courthouse did. The people celebrating her divorce had already lost. They just didn't know it yet. Across the room, Bradley Sinclair adjusted his suit and quietly spoke with his attorney. He never looked at Natalie, not when she signed, not when the judge dissolved the marriage, not even when she stood to leave. That hurt more than she expected. 8 years together, and this was how it ended. No fight, no apology, just paperwork. As the elevator doors opened, Bradley finally spoke. "Take care of yourself." Natalie turned. For one brief second, she searched his face for the man she'd married. The man who once promised she'd never face the world alone. He was gone. "You too," she replied. The elevator doors closed. Neither of them knew it would be the last private conversation they would ever have. 2 floors below, the Sinclair family celebrated. Champagne flowed. Laughter filled the private dining room. Bradley's mother, Marlene Sinclair, lifted her glass. "Finally," she said, "our family can breathe again." Someone joked that Bradley was finally free to marry someone from the right family. More laughter followed. Then Marlene smiled. "That Callaway girl never truly belonged with us." No one noticed the waiter placing a complimentary bottle of champagne beside her. Attached was a small envelope. Curious, Marlene opened it. Inside was a single sentence. "Enjoy today. It's the last celebration your family will ever have together." She frowned. Probably one of Bradley's immature friends. She crumpled the note and dropped it into her purse. It would become the biggest mistake of her life. Natalie never saw the celebration. She drove home through light rain until her phone vibrated. Not a message, a calendar reminder. 9 a.m. Follow-up appointment. Her grip tightened around the steering wheel. The reminder disappeared from her screen after a few seconds, but the memory didn't. 4 months earlier, she had almost canceled the appointment. Work was busy. Her father needed help preparing for a board review. Bradley had planned a weekend away. Healthy people canceled routine checkups all the time. But she went anyway. 40 minutes later, the doctor returned carrying another file. Natalie noticed that first. Doctors rarely carried extra files when everything was normal. "I'm afraid one of your test results wasn't what we expected." Natalie smiled politely. "What is it?" The doctor sat down. "You tested positive for a sexually transmitted infection." Natalie blinked. "I think you've mixed up my file." We repeated the test. There was silence. "I've never—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The doctor did. "Your husband should be tested as well." Everything inside Natalie collapsed. There was only one explanation. Someone had brought that disease into her marriage, and she already knew who. She cried exactly once. Not at the hospital, not in the parking lot. She waited until she reached home. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel and gave herself exactly 1 minute. At 60 seconds, she wiped away the tears, fixed her makeup, and walked inside. Bradley stood in the kitchen making coffee. He smiled. "Hey." He kissed her forehead. "How'd the appointment go?" Natalie looked into the eyes of the man she'd trusted for 8 years, then smiled. "Everything's fine." It was the biggest lie she'd ever told. And somehow, not the biggest lie inside that kitchen. For the next 11 days, she became an actress inside her own marriage. She laughed, cooked dinner, held conversations, kissed him goodbye every morning, while secretly taking medication prescribed by a pharmacy across town where no one knew her name. She wanted proof before confronting him. Instead, she found something much worse. One morning, she volunteered to help the accounting department at Callaway Steel while the finance manager was away. Most invoices were ordinary: steel deliveries, fuel, equipment. Then one file caught her attention: a payment worth $186,000. The paperwork looked complete, except there was no delivery confirmation. Natalie checked the warehouse records. Nothing. She called the yard supervisor. "Did we ever receive 60 tons from Northridge Industrial?" A pause. "No." "You sure?" "We've never bought from Northridge." Natalie opened the vendor database. Northridge Industrial. Registered only 6 months earlier. 3 invoices. Everyone paid. nearly $200,000. But almost no public record of the company existed. Her instincts immediately told her something was wrong. Before she could look deeper, Bradley appeared at the accounting office. "There you are," he smiled. "You've been spending a lot of time down here lately." The comment sounded casual, but Natalie noticed something else. His eyes drifted toward her computer, only for a second, yet long enough to make her uncomfortable. That evening, during dinner at Marlene's house, the older woman casually stirred her wine. "I hear you've been helping accounting." "They needed extra hands," Natalie replied. Marlene smiled. "I just hope you don't misunderstand routine paperwork." The room became quiet. Natalie held her gaze. "I've been around this company since I was 9. Marlene's smile barely moved. "I'm sure you have." The conversation changed, but Natalie understood the warning. Someone had already told Marlene she was asking questions, which meant someone inside the company was watching her. And from that moment, Natalie realized she wasn't just uncovering an affair. She had stumbled into something far more dangerous. That night, Natalie couldn't sleep. She opened her laptop and searched for Northridge Industrial. Nothing. No real website. No employee records. Only a recent business registration linked to a mailbox rental address. She searched 2 other vendors she'd seen in company reports. Same result, different names, different companies, same pattern, shell businesses. Her phone rang, unknown number. She almost ignored it. Instead, she answered. "You don't know me," a woman's calm voice said. "But Emily Foster thought you might need my help." Emily, her college roommate, the only person Natalie had trusted enough to tell about the doctor's appointment. "My name is Renata Ford. I'm a private investigator." Natalie frowned. "I didn't hire you." "No," Renata replied, "but your friend did." She paused. "And I think someone is watching you." Natalie's stomach growled. "What do you mean?" "A gray SUV followed you home from your mother-in-law's house tonight." Silence. "I don't know who they are," Renata continued, "but they weren't amateurs." For the first time, Natalie wondered whether she was already too late. The next morning, she returned to Callaway Steel. This time, she looked more carefully. The 3 suspicious invoices had all been approved exactly 17 minutes after submission. Not 16, not 18, 17, every single time. That wasn't coincidence. Someone had built a system. As she studied the files, Walter Callaway's longtime attorney, Harold Pierce, appeared in the doorway. "Everything all right?" Natalie instinctively minimized her screen. "Just helping accounting catch up." Harold smiled and left. Only after he disappeared did Natalie realize something. She had just hidden evidence from a man she'd trusted since childhood. This investigation was already changing her. An hour later, she received a text from Marcus Webb. "Can you meet?" "Not at the office." He sent the address. The cafe sat nearly 40 minutes outside the city. Quiet. Forgettable. Exactly the kind of place executives never visited. Marcus was already waiting. He didn't waste time. Instead, he slid a thick folder across the table. "Before you open that," he said, "answer one question. How much do you trust your husband?" Natalie didn't hesitate. "I don't." Marcus nodded. "Good. Because if you did, I'd tell you to walk away right now." Natalie opened the folder. Her heart sank. Fake vendors. Inflated contracts. Ghost employees. Millions of dollars flowing through dozens of shell companies. "This isn't simple fraud," Marcus said quietly. "It's an entire financial network." He pointed at a chart. Money moves through fake companies before ending in real accounts. Natalie's eyes stopped on one name. Sinclair Consulting Group. "I've never heard of it." Marcus flipped another page. "You have. It operates under another name." He showed her the tax records. Different company. Same tax number. Natalie's pulse quickened. "This has been happening for years." Marcus nodded. "And I think nearly 30 people are involved." Natalie leaned back in disbelief. This wasn't one dishonest employee. It was organized. Carefully planned. Someone had spent years stealing from her father's company. Neither of them noticed the man sitting 3 booths away. Baseball cap. Coffee gone cold. Phone resting beside his cup. He quietly photographed every page Marcus showed Natalie. When she finally left, he made one phone call. Only 4 words. "She's meeting someone." Back at Callaway Steel, Bradley unlocked Natalie's office. He knew he shouldn't be there. He looked around carefully before stepping inside. Everything seemed normal, until he noticed her desk drawer. She always kept it locked. Today, it wasn't. Inside, he found nothing suspicious. Just notebooks, pens, meeting notes. Too ordinary. As he closed the drawer, a torn piece of paper inside the trash caught his attention. Only 3 words remained. Northridge Industrial. Bradley's expression changed. He recognized the name. He just couldn't remember where he'd seen it. That evening, Natalie arrived home exhausted. Bradley smiled. "So, what's Northridge?" Time stopped. Natalie's heartbeat slammed against her ribs. "What did you say?" "I asked what Northridge is." She forced herself to stay calm. "I've never heard of it." Bradley watched her for another second before smiling. Must have confused it with another supplier. He kissed her forehead and walked upstairs. Natalie stood frozen. He knew the name. He'd tried to see if she knew it too. That wasn't a casual question. It was a test. That night, neither of them slept. At 2:17 a.m., Bradley quietly left the bedroom. Natalie kept her breathing steady, pretending to sleep. She heard his office door close downstairs. Then, the sound of a printer. Page after page. Printing in the middle of the night. Natalie slowly opened her eyes. For the first time, she no longer felt like a wife living with her husband. She felt like a witness, sharing a house with a suspect. The next morning, Bradley acted unusually cheerful. He made breakfast, asked if Natalie wanted coffee, even offered to drive her to work. She smiled, thanked him, and played along. If he was watching for signs that she knew something, he found none. At 11 o'clock, Renata called. "I need to see you." Now. Her office was above an old bookstore. No receptionist, no small talk. The moment Natalie walked in, Renata spread several photographs across the desk. Bradley, standing outside an apartment building. Then another. Bradley embracing a woman. Another. The 2 of them entering the building together. Time-stamped. Dated. Over and over again. "This has been going on for almost 2 years," Renata said quietly. Natalie closed her eyes. She had expected betrayal. Seeing it made it real. But Renata wasn't finished. She slid a lease agreement across the desk. The apartment wasn't rented in the woman's name. It was paid for by a company called Horizon Property Holdings. Then Renata placed one final document on the table. A bank transfer. Northridge Industrial, Horizon Property Holdings. Natalie stared at it. The affair, the fake companies, the missing money, they weren't separate anymore. Someone had been using stolen company funds to finance Bradley's secret life. Before Natalie could speak, her phone rang. "Marcus." His voice was tense. "Someone searched my office." "What?" "Nothing's missing." "Then how do you know?" "They put my files back in the wrong order." There was silence. "I've arranged them alphabetically for 21 years. Natalie's stomach clenched. "They're not trying to stop us anymore," Marcus continued. "They're trying to find out how much we know." Driving back to Callaway Steel, every car behind her suddenly looked suspicious. Every traffic light felt too long. She wasn't thinking like a wife anymore. She was thinking like someone who might become the next target. When she arrived, Harold Pierce was waiting. "Your father wants to see you. Before we go further, if you've ever had to be the one to tell someone you love that their trust was betrayed, you know exactly how heavy this moment is." Subscribe now if you want to see how Walter and Natalie respond to this betrayal, because what happens over the next 48 hours is nothing short of a reckoning. Walter stood quietly beside the factory windows. "When did this start?" he asked. Natalie knew exactly what he meant. "I've been investigating for a few weeks." Walter sighed. "You should have come to me. I wanted proof. You should have trusted me." His voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed. Then he said something she hadn't considered. "If someone has been stealing from this company, my signature is on almost every approval." Natalie's heart sank. She had been trying to expose fraud. She hadn't realized her father could be blamed for it. Harold entered carrying a thick folder. "We have another problem." Inside were dozens of payment approvals. Every one carried Walter's signature. Walter stared at them. "I didn't sign these." Harold nodded. "I know. They're originals." Walter slowly sat down. "They buried them." He explained how hundreds of routine documents were placed inside large approval packets every month. Someone had hidden fraudulent transactions among legitimate paperwork. He had unknowingly signed them. The fraud wasn't sloppy. It was brilliant. It had been built around Walter's trust. "The external auditors arrive Monday," Harold said. 3 days. That was all they had. That evening, Marcus arrived with 3 boxes of financial records. For hours, he, Natalie, and Harold rebuilt the entire scheme. Sticky notes covered the walls. Shell companies connected to other shell companies. Money moved through fake vendors before disappearing into one final corporation. Blackridge Holdings. Marcus frowned. I still can't identify the owner. No public records. No directors. Nothing. Natalie kept staring at the name. She had heard it before. She just couldn't remember where. At nearly 1 a.m, Natalie finally drove home. Bradley was waiting in the living room. A folder rested on the coffee table. I found these, he said. Natalie opened it. Her blood ran cold. Inside were copies of the exact financial records Marcus had shown her. Northridge, Horizon Property Holdings, Sinclair Consulting, everything. Where did you get these? She whispered. They were taped to my windshield. No note, no fingerprints. Natalie looked up slowly. Someone had stolen copies of Marcus's investigation and delivered them directly to Bradley. But why? Bradley looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen in months. I think someone wants us to stop blaming each other and start asking who's really behind all this. For the first time since discovering his affair, Natalie wasn't sure Bradley was simply one of the guilty. He might also be someone else's pawn. And somehow, that possibility frightened her even more. The following morning, Natalie barely had time to settle into her office before Harold appeared at her door. The emergency board meeting starts in 15 minutes. His expression told her everything. Something had happened. The conference room was unusually full. Board members, outside auditors, company lawyers. Walter sat at the head of the table, looking more tired than Natalie had ever seen him. As the meeting began, he stood. An internal review has uncovered serious financial irregularities. Until we know exactly what's happened, every document will be examined. Murmurs spread around the room. Before Walter could continue, the conference room doors opened. Marlene Sinclair walked in, uninvited, calm, perfectly dressed. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said sweetly, but since my family's name is being questioned, I thought I should help. She placed a leather portfolio on the table. I believe someone is manipulating company records to frame the Sinclair family. Natalie's heart skipped. How did Marlene know? Marlene slowly removed several financial documents. They looked almost identical to the records Marcus had uncovered. Then she turned toward Natalie. I also believe someone has been accessing company files without authorization. Every eye shifted toward Natalie. Without breaking eye contact, Marlene pulled out one final item. A photograph. Natalie and Marcus, sitting together at the roadside cafe. The timestamp was perfectly clear. I've been wondering, Marlene said. When you plan to tell the board you've been conducting a private investigation behind everyone's backs. The room exploded with whispers. Walter looked at his daughter. Harold remained silent. For several long seconds, Natalie said nothing. Then, she smiled. Harold noticed first. Natalie? She picked up the photograph and studied it carefully. Then she looked at Marlene. This picture actually helps me. For the first time, Marlene looked confused. Natalie placed the photo back on the table. It proves someone has been following me. There was silence. Innocent people don't hire someone to secretly photograph another person's meetings. Several directors exchanged uneasy looks. Marlene quickly replied, That proves nothing. It proves someone was desperate to know what I was investigating. Natalie answered calmly. And I'd like to know why. At that moment, the conference room door opened again. Marcus Webb walked in carrying a laptop. I apologize for being late. He connected the laptop to the large screen. A complicated flowchart appeared. Company after company. Money moving through fake vendors. Consulting firms. Holding companies. Finally ending at one corporation. Blackridge Holdings. Marcus faced the board. This isn't a bookkeeping mistake. It's an organized financial network that has operated inside this company for years. No one spoke. He clicked again. The ownership trail appeared. 3 trusts. 2 offshore entities. 1 final document. Beneficial owner, Marlene Sinclair. The room froze. Walter stared at the screen. It was you. His voice cracked. You sat at my table. You watched our families become one. And all this time, you were stealing from us. For the first time in years, Marlene didn't have an answer. She quickly recovered. Those documents prove nothing. Marcus calmly removed another folder. They're authenticated. Every trust required biometric verification. There is no dispute over ownership. Harold reviewed the documents. His face hardened. They're genuine. The silence shattered. Board members erupted into arguments. Several demanded the police be called immediately. Others demanded emergency votes to freeze every Sinclair-controlled account. Walter never looked away from Marlene. You didn't just steal money, you stole trust. Security entered the room. Not dramatically. Professionally. The lead officer approached Marlene. Mrs. Sinclair, you'll need to come with us. For the first time in 8 years, the woman who controlled every room walked out of one with absolutely none of the power. No one celebrated after Marlene was escorted out. The silence inside the boardroom felt heavier than any applause ever could. Walter remained standing, staring at the empty chair where his oldest friend had been sitting only moments earlier. I never imagined, he said quietly, that betrayal would be wearing a familiar face. Within hours, federal investigators arrived at Callaway Steel. Servers were secured. Financial records were seized. Bank accounts connected to Blackridge Holdings were frozen. As investigators dug deeper, the full picture finally emerged. For nearly 8 years, Marlene had built a network of shell companies that quietly siphoned millions from Callaway Steel. The fake vendors, the inflated contracts, the ghost employees. Every dollar eventually flowed back to companies she secretly controlled. Several Sinclair relatives had helped approve payments without asking questions. Others knowingly received money through consulting firms that existed only on paper. The empire Marlene had spent years building collapsed in a single afternoon. Bradley sat alone in his office as investigators searched every file cabinet around him. He replayed the past 2 years over and over. The expensive gifts, the unexplained business accounts, the apartment he'd used for his affair. He had convinced himself he wasn't asking questions because he trusted his family. Now he realized the truth. He simply hadn't wanted answers. Late that afternoon, an investigator entered his office. Mr. Sinclair? Bradley stood. We've completed our preliminary review. Bradley swallowed. Am I under arrest? The investigator shook his head. No, but you approved payments tied to fraudulent companies. I didn't know. We believe you. He paused. But your negligence allowed the fraud to continue. Bradley closed his eyes. He wouldn't be remembered as the mastermind. He would be remembered as the man who looked away. And somehow, that felt even worse. Across town, Natalie stood alone outside the hospital, where months earlier her life had changed forever. She looked at the entrance. The same doors, the same parking lot, the same bench where she'd cried for exactly 60 seconds. Back then, she'd believed discovering Bradley's affair was the worst thing that could happen to her. She smiled sadly. She had no idea that heartbreak had actually saved her. If she had never gone to that appointment, she never would have questioned Bradley. She never would have stepped into accounting. She never would have uncovered the fraud destroying her father's company. Sometimes the moment that breaks your life is the same moment that saves it. 3 months later, the investigation officially concluded. Millions of dollars had been recovered. Most of the shell companies were dissolved. Several members of the Sinclair family accepted plea agreements rather than face lengthy trials. Marlene faced multiple criminal charges, along with civil lawsuits that stripped away much of the fortune she'd spent years protecting. Her perfect reputation disappeared almost overnight. One rainy afternoon, Natalie found a handwritten envelope in her mailbox. She immediately recognized the handwriting. Bradley. Inside were only a few lines. I spent years believing loyalty meant protecting my family. I finally understand that real loyalty begins with telling the truth. I'm sorry I learned that too late. Natalie read the letter once, folded it carefully, then dropped it into the fireplace. She watched it burn without a single tear. Some chapters deserve to be remembered, not reopened. She whispered one final sentence to the flames. Goodbye, Bradley. Then she walked away without looking back. Almost a year later, Walter Callaway called one final board meeting. The atmosphere inside the conference room felt completely different from the one that had nearly destroyed the company. The investigations were over. The lawsuits were ending. Callaway Steel was profitable again. Walter stood at the front of the room and smiled. I've spent 42 years building this company. He paused. But over the last year, I've watched someone protect it better than I ever could. He turned toward Natalie. When everything was falling apart, she stayed calm. When everyone else looked away, she kept asking questions. And when our family's legacy was hanging by a thread, she refused to let it fall. He looked around the room. I believe it's time. The board members exchanged glances. Then one by one, their hands went up. The vote was unanimous. Natalie Callaway became the next president of Callaway Steel. The room filled with applause. Walter walked over and hugged his daughter. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "So am I," Natalie replied. Not because she had won, because she had survived. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Natalie walked alone through the factory. The familiar smell of steel filled the air. Machines slowly powered down for the night. Workers waved as they headed home. One older employee smiled. "I remember when your father used to bring you here after school." Natalie laughed. "I remember pretending to help." "You weren't pretending," he replied. "You've always belonged here." Those simple words meant more than any title ever could. She stopped beside one of the massive steel beams waiting to be shipped, cold, solid, unshakable. Just like the company her father had built, just like the woman she had become. Her phone vibrated. A calendar reminder appeared, exactly 1 year since the doctor's appointment. Natalie looked at it for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not with sadness, with gratitude. Because the day she once believed had ruined her life had actually revealed it. She deleted the reminder. She didn't need it anymore. Some memories no longer deserved to hurt. As she reached the factory doors, she paused and looked back one last time. A year earlier, she'd walked into a doctor's office believing she had the perfect marriage. Hours later, she'd discovered betrayal. Days later, she'd uncovered fraud. Months later, she'd watched an empire built on lies collapse. She lost a husband, but she saved her father's life's work. She lost the future she thought she wanted, but found the future she was meant to lead. Sometimes life doesn't destroy your plans. It destroys the lies that were standing in their place. Natalie switched off the lights in the executive hallway and stepped outside into the cool evening air. This time, she wasn't walking away from something. She was walking toward everything she had earned and allowed herself, finally, to simply feel proud. Not vindicated, not relieved. Proud of the company she'd protected, of the father whose trust she'd honored, and of the version of herself who had walked into a lawyer's office some months ago, signed her name to the end of a marriage, and quietly, without a single wasted move, reclaimed everything that had ever been truly hers. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt completely free. If you made it this far, thank you for watching Natalie's story all the way through. If you enjoyed it, subscribing helps more than you'd think, and I'd love to know which part hit you hardest. Let me know in the comments.